First episode of the first real season. My name's P.T. Burnem, and this is the ZnZerna Music Hour. Today we are going to talk about sampler. That's S-A-M-P-L-R. We're going to talk about music. We're going to talk about sampling and sequencing and synthesizers. Today we're talking about one of my very favorite samplers, which also includes a sequencer. Sampling, taken down to its small enough, like if you're just sampling a single waveform, that's pretty much the same as synthesis, at least digital synthesis. I guess the point is that you can do almost anything with anything as long as you're not afraid to break the rules. Tonight, we're not going to be breaking a lot of rules because within the parameters of the rules, our friends, all these lovely tools inside of Sampler, are going to allow us to do all sorts of great stuff. That is a music production app for the iPad, relatively inexpensive way to get very, very dynamic sample manipulation. So before we cover that app, I'm going to bust out the guitar. When you're sampling things, what you usually get is a single sample. Now, if you want to play that, louder or softer after you've sampled it, what most people do, what you're able to do is turn down the volume or turn up the volume if you want it louder. That will give you a louder or a softer sample, but it won't really sound like someone playing harder or more intense because of a thing called dynamics. Why this sounds different than this. The physical vibration of the strings, the actual clicking and quick vibration of the strings there at the beginning of the sound. Not only are the strings themselves physically vibrating in a harsher, faster way with their own harmonics emphasized more there at the attack, and quite a quick and sudden onset of the attack when you play it a lot louder. It's very small, but the difference between when the fingers hit the four notes of the chord is very different from this to this. So they are also being hit faster, which doesn't happen when you just turn something up. There are a lot of subtle cues that let the human mind know that something is more intense or louder dynamically. And a lot of it has to do with the harmonic resonances present in the attack of the sound. When all those strings are vibrating so violently there at the attack, they are also beating against each other and causing subharmonics and all sorts of chaos. The sound of the attack of this sounds harsher and noisier than this. So volume is only a small part of dynamics. And all the rest of those, which actually there's a whole bunch, but I've just named a few. A lot of it has to do with the volume of the attack and the harmonics present in the attack, etc. Certain things about the instrument as well. Body of the guitar vibrates harder if you smash the strings harder, so there's more body sound. The good news is that some of these indicators of dynamics can be mimicked relatively simply with samplers. Today we're going to focus on the ones that can. What I've done is I've put a small passage from an album that I'm working on into Sampler. So what I played in was So I played a bunch of that into Sampler just using the iPhone microphone, which is a pretty lo-fi way to do it. With the effects and the way that you use Sampler, that lo-fi-ness, that bit of frequency, it actually enhances it. It really makes it have its own feel. as an instrument. You can also sample directly, from any source, save it as a file, and then move it into sampler as well. You can do, it's very flexible that way, and I'll show you in a minute what's going on with it. Before we get into the real body of what's going on, I think maybe we can all just take a minute. Go ahead. Let's get into sampler. This is the project loading screen, which you reach by pushing this S in the upper left-hand corner. Edit projects, move them around, load them, save them, etc. You can also change these two options, run in the background and play button latch. Play button latch will allow you to make it so that the play and pause options for the individual slots with samples can be turned on and off, and they will stay that way rather than being momentary. I always use run in background because it doesn't take much memory to do so, and you can use other music apps with it in that way. The bit that looks like a file is where you load files. You have 6 slots in sampler. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each one can hold a sample and have a tool to manipulate that sample. It can also record loops of behaviors with that tool. Also do what they call an infinity hold on any point within the play surface. This is the play surface. When you select a sample, you're greeted with it in big all up on your screen. The first tool to the left, highlighted here in blue, is just a sort of sample player. Something that makes it unique is that it plays the sample from wherever you touch, as long as you don't have any markers set. And I'll explain markers in a minute. So I'm going to touch it here, and you'll hear it play. I do have some markers, and this is the marker screen. When you toggle this button here, you can edit your markers, which brings up this gray box. You create a marker. You can move them. You can swipe down to delete them. You can also cause a bunch of markers to appear. 4, 8, 16. This is good for beat slicing if you do that sort of thing. It can be very handy to just chop it into 4 equal parts. And when you do, if it's not perfect, you can always move the markers around again. So you can sequence marker movements. When you think creatively about it, doing stuttering or different kinds of effects like that, it's really got a lot of potential. You can put them on the board, or you can eliminate them all by pressing 0, and then it will play from wherever you touch. A simple way to get dynamic variation with a sampler is to alter the point at which the sample begins whenever you activate it. Say you've got an MPC and you've got pads and you've got a sample on a pad, and what you're trying to do is get that sample but dynamically less harsh, and you copy that sample to a new pad, and this time wherever you adjust your sample start, you can push it forward, and that will sound less harsh because it's got less harmonic content. That versus this. This will work with almost anything. Some things will need a little bit of doctoring, but it is a fast way to get some dynamic variation if you don't have any other ways. Here you have your attack, and here you have your decay. And we're going to go over this a bunch of times in the show, but attack is how long it takes the sound to reach its full volume after you've activated it. This is an immediate onset. With a longer attack, you have a ramping up of the sound. I like this on acoustic hits because it's naturally louder in the beginning, but you've made it so that it's actually lower in the volume in the beginning, but it still wants to be louder, so it has this sparkle at the beginning and then rapidly drops in volume and then rises up again. You can play around with start times and attack times very easily with sampler, doing all sorts of excellent manipulations. It's nice for composition which is another thing that I use Sampler for, is chopping up samples and seeing how you might like to play them, or even chopping up acoustic phrases and seeing how you might want to replay them on guitar. So this is all about trading things back and forth between different tools that you use for the process of making music, and in that way letting something evolve organically through that process, and you get different variations that you wouldn't get otherwise. Now the next tool here is the looper. It's a special type of looping tool that will loop whatever is between your two fingers. I don't use it much, but you could easily use it to run multiple loops with different timings and get avant-garde tape loop sounding stuff that has a different characteristic than the strict tape loop tool. It's easy to use, and it's got some functions that are very interesting creatively. And of course, you can use any of the tools that we have here at our disposal, like say bring it down an octave. So that's really sounds nice. You can see how you could easily play around by feel and get some interesting off-kilter patterns going relatively quickly. That's another thing about Sampler and its immediacy and lack of menus that I really like. It allows you to immediately get to work. You load a sample in here and it is, boom, right at your fingertips. Here are the tools. Here's the different ways to play around with it. The next tool is one of my very favorite, the Ebow. I used this tool all over the original Drones record, the self-titled one. Basically, Isaac and Eric would play acoustic guitars, and I would occasionally sample them through the microphone and then turn that stuff into something that we call digidelics. You can actually find that record under Drones, and you might have to search for Richmond Drones too. It's really one of my favorite things that I've ever created. What this will do is take what you've recorded and loop a small chunk of it. It'll do that wherever you touch, and the markers act a bit differently here. What they will do is magnetically attract your fingers. So if you get near them, it makes it, see how it locked in? That makes it easy to say, oh, I like this particular loop. Put a marker there. So it's always got that same looped sound, and you can still play with the volume. That's something that makes Sampler incredibly powerful, is the ability to control dynamics both with volume and with harmonic content and intensity by moving along the x-axis. So you can get that going real easy. You can get a nice drone going, and because you've sampled directly from the acoustic guitar, if you're recording things, then it will be automatically in tune with those things. You can drop it an octave. I really, really love this. I'm using it all over this new album that I'm making. And I'd like to demonstrate right now how you can get a nice dynamic moving drone or pad just using the looper that's built in. We're just going to watch real quick and stop it at like 16. When you record a loop, which is done simply by pressing this middle record button, which is the record button for the looper and sequencer, rather than this one up here, which is a recorder for audio into the sample slots. See how that's already going? And then it's easy to drop notes in on over it. And it sounds relatively neat. That's a way that you can use the Ebow tool to create a pad from an acoustic guitar that will go along with whatever you're playing on the acoustic guitar. Now, if you notice these little dots here, they're representative of the 3 layers that you can use. You can only do 3 layers of recording, and you can delete them. You cannot activate and deactivate them. As a looper, it's relatively rudimentary, but you can delete them. I'm not going to. I'm going to let that roll. Actually, let me explain the arpeggiator a little bit. What it does is it will add any finger you put down to a constantly playing arpeggiator, which basically just plays it at a rhythm. Right now I think I've got it going at 16th notes. What's really excellent is that with the looper and sequencer, you can dynamically change the timing of whatever's happening. It's just 1 note, then it's 2, and if you put a 3rd in, it'll sound like it's triplet. You can change things really easily by adding layers to the looper sequencer and recording those changes in timing. What's really cool is that it will stay in 16. It's a loop of 16. It just sounds like it's moving in 3/3, but it will always loop back on that 16. So if you're working with, say, a drum machine that can only do 4/4 or some variant of 4/4, it's very easy to sync it up with sampler. So we can get into the other 2 tools next week. What you have is a sort of rudimentary looper that will let you just loop whatever sample you've got. Doesn't let you do much other than that. You can't use the attack or release. It's mostly only useful if you have something that you want playing constantly or stopped. That's this one here. You can turn it on and it will go. If you play with the release of these bass notes. Now, unfortunately, you cannot record your movements on the release or on the attack or any of the tools, but you can do it live. And the way that I use sampler, which I think is the best way to use it, is as an instrument that you play live over your recorded material. So I do sequencing mostly as a note-taking. At the end of the day, the stuff that you hear on the tracks is played out live. Because it's easy to keep things in sync, it automatically does, just by keeping it in 16. Really nice to play these things live over the material. And you can get a lot of layers by saving, I can save this using that project, and I just say acoustic sampler, let's say ambient, and then you could do ambient B, which would be a variation on this, and use that as a layer as well, and that will go with the bass that we used originally. Now, you might have effects in your recording scenario that you like, in which case you can just record it dry and work with it in there, which affords you flexibility later. But I really love the reverb on this, not for everything. It wouldn't be good as just a reverb on your vocals or something, but as a tool within sampler, as an instrument, it sounds really good. Sparkly, and the delay I think also sounds really good. We can add some of that reverb to this original guy. It just sort of sinks you in a little bit. I think I'm gonna start getting into the effects, first of which is the compressor. And I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna play this like this, and I'm gonna show you what the compressor does. And I'm gonna make a note on compression, which is this. Compression is distortion. When you're hearing a sound, you're hearing a fundamental frequency, which determines its pitch, but you're also hearing a lot of harmonic frequency, determined by the surrounding environment, other things that are vibrating nearby, things that are vibrated by it and send back vibrations, you're hearing a lot of harmonic content. If it's a vibrating string, there's harmonics right there on the string. There are different points vibrating at different frequencies that are not the fundamental frequency. So the fundamental frequency determines the pitch, and it's the loudest. So you can imagine you've got the fundamental frequency here, and the other frequencies, the harmonic frequencies that you're hearing, are lower in volume. So when you compress, what you're doing basically is you're taking higher volume stuff and you're lowering its volume. At a certain threshold, it will start to compress things and not let them get as loud as they want to. Say, like, instead of for every 2 decibels louder it goes, it'll actually only get 1 more decibel loud in the mix. So it compresses down those peaks. And what that does, by comparison, is make the harmonics louder. And making harmonic content louder is one of the most surefire ways to distort something in a pleasant way. I'm gonna bring up this compression, and I'm gonna have to turn down the volume to compensate, but you're gonna hear it start to get distorted. And you can hear how it's not just the sound is louder, which it is much louder, which is why I had to compensate by turning the main volume down. But it's also got that bit of fuzz. Not all distortions work this way, of course. It is one surefire way of distorting things. So compression is distortion. It's just subtle. If you like this app, you should go and get it. Used to be cheaper and now it's more expensive. I anticipate it probably getting even more expensive because it is very handy. I am now going to switch things over to a video that I shot on the filter effect. The next effect in the effect list is one that is fairly easy to understand, which is a filter. But it's a very important thing in both synthesis and in sampling. Here we have an XY axis where the x-axis is the filter frequency, the frequency at which it cuts off. You know, a low-pass filter will allow low frequencies to pass through, and a high-frequency filter will do the opposite. A low-pass filter will only let low frequencies through beyond a certain frequency threshold, and a high-pass filter will only let high frequencies through past a certain frequency threshold. I'm going to do a low pass filter first. As I bring down, you're hearing less and less of that high frequency content. And it actually has a bit of an effect of sounding far away, because distance tends to remove high frequency content before it removes low frequency content. Low frequency content moves better over long distances. Whales know this. The high-pass filter will do exactly the opposite. Sounds like a little bit like a telephone or an old radio. Now, one important factor with filters in the world of synthesizers and sampling is resonance. Resonance is basically taking that cutoff frequency barrier from which no more higher frequencies pass on the low pass filter, and no more low frequencies pass on the high pass filter. So that cutoff frequency, you can raise its decibel. You'll see this little horn here on the left raise up. And as I sweep the filter frequency, you'll notice it. I'm going to try it with the low pass filter. You hear how it opens and closes? And you can really accentuate that act of opening and closing through resonance. Resonance can often be much more powerful and self-oscillating and wild on other instruments. The resonance here in sampler is mostly tame and more for sculpting sound. Stick wheel! So this is a ZnZerna ear, basically the same as a human ear. It receives vibrations from the world through little hairs called cochlea. These cochlea pick up different vibrations depending on what size they are. One of the reasons that older people have trouble hearing is because those smaller hairs have broken. If you are trying to get someone who is older to hear you, it does not just help to talk louder, it also helps to talk lower and maybe a little bit slower. For now, I think we've gotten the basics. Let's go ahead and go over those basics one more time. You've got 6 slots to hold samples. You play with the samples through this playing field here. This area up here is dedicated to effects. Up here we have tempo, which you can change by touching. Down here we have a number of tools that work with the tools in the toolbar. Below the tools we have the markers. Open up this little gray bar down here and place a marker. You've got no marker to play from wherever your finger touches. But if you do have a marker to the left of wherever you touch, it will play from that marker. So that can be used for all sorts of variations because the marker has to be to the left for it to register. That means that, say here, I can have a number of markers. Those will be surefire start points. And anything to the left of all those markers, you can still activate wherever your finger touches. So you can combine those things. The toolbar up here contains all your tools. You have the sampler, you have the looper, you have the Ebow, tape machine, which, whatever markers you put down and whatever loops you record will stay as you switch tools. This can result in some really crazy things happening and some very cool chaos that is usually in tune with what you're doing. Tape tool here, it will allow you to do tape type effects like this, which for me is a kind of one trick deal. I don't much use like DJ style effects, but if you do, then that's going to be very handy. What I do use it for is to get a number of loops rolling, because you're going forward from this center point, you're moving forward with the tape, and to the left, you're moving backwards. So everything sounds in reverse. And if you get both of them moving at once, you can have different speeds of loops. Basically, with the looper, I will either not use it at all or use it like that and base the whole track around it. You can get arpeggios that sound like synthesizer arpeggiators, but have very different characteristics, which makes them sound strange to the mind. I really enjoy that type of stuff. This is a great way to manipulate samples and make things sound a little more unique, especially if you layer them with the original samples. If you've played something more traditional like guitar chords or whatever, you can get a lot of atmosphere. If you're sampling, you want to be dynamic, get some simple dynamic variation, even if you don't have multiple samples of an instrument. Ideally, what you would like to do is maybe get 2 or 3 samples of an instrument. So you have a quiet hit, a loud hit, and a really loud hit that also has a lot of force behind it. Every sound has a picture in the mind of the listener, and that picture is different depending on who the listener is and what their experience is. Some are very powerful, though. They are like culturally relevant and bring up very common visions. Sampling is a easy way to get a good sound and sort of take something that you like and put it in a new context. That's one of the beautiful things about sampling, is that you can take something and put it in a new context. If people haven't heard it before, then you can sort of determine the context in which it's heard. But if you take a very common sample, something that has a strong cultural understanding already, it's already got a lot of association inside the minds of the listener, then you're somewhat limited in the picture that you can paint with that, unless you chop it very, very small. And the smaller you get when you're chopping samples, the closer you're getting to what is basically actually just synthesis. Sticker subscription thing is rolling. If you already have stickers, thank you very much. They are going to be a rather large part of the show as it evolves. But you can sign up for the sticker subscription service and get a small squad of Zernas in your mailbox each month that coincide with some ideas on the show. Huge thanks to Dan Keach and Cold Rhymes Records for hosting the ZnZerna Music Hour. Till next time, keep listening.